Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're putting on our detective hats to solve a biblical mystery that's literally been debated for centuries. We're taking a really deep dive into some historical texts to try and untangle one of the most famous controversies in ancient scripture.
So here's the massive, glaring question we need to investigate. We're looking at two foundational figures of the early Christian church, and we have to ask, did two of history's greatest biblical authors completely contradict each other on how a person is justified, made right before God?
Section 1. The Great Theological Contradiction. To set the scene of our crime, we need to call our two key witnesses to the stand, the Apostle Paul and James.
This tension is just brilliant. Look at the dynamic here. Paul famously insists that Abraham was justified by his faith way before he ever did any works of the law. But then James comes along and firmly insists that no, justification requires works. It cannot happen by faith alone. On paper, this looks like a total head-on collision, right?
Just listen to this striking testimony from James chapter 2, verse 24. He writes, "You see that a man is justified by works and not by faith alone." So our whole job here is figuring out, is James directly attacking Paul's theology? Or is he actually attacking a complete misunderstanding of Paul's teachings that had spread among early believers?
Let's move to Section 2, Exhibit A, Father Abraham. We're going to examine James's prime piece of evidence to see exactly how he reconstructs his historical timeline.
Now, what's genuinely fascinating here is the original Greek word James uses. The word is argos. Basically, it translates to barren, useless, or idle. James calls out people who separate faith from works as shallow, warning that their faith is argos. And in an ancient Jewish context, barrenness wasn't just a physical thing. It was a profound, devastating metaphor for being entirely outside of a fruitful covenant with God. To apply that critique to Abraham, a guy whose entire covenant was based on the promise of ultimate fruitfulness, is a huge deal.
Let's look at the timeline, because this is where the plot really thickens. Paul's argument usually stops at point 1, Genesis 15, where Abraham's faith was reckoned as righteousness. But James pushes it further. He argues that Abraham's justification actually culminated years later at point 2, on the altar in Genesis 22 when he offered his son Isaac. And that sequence ultimately leads to point 3, centuries later in Isaiah, where Abraham is literally given the title Friend of God.
Basically, for James, Genesis 22 was the active fulfillment of Genesis 15. God's initial assessment of Abraham's internal faith was proven 100% accurate when Abraham actually acted on it in the real world. The obedience proved the faith, securing him that ultimate title of God's friend.
All right, Section 3, the righteousness puzzle. If we want to solve this mystery, we've got to bust through some heavy theological jargon and figure out what it actually means to be declared righteous.
Let's start with the Greek word dikaio. It translates to making or declaring someone righteous, meaning they are fully acceptable to God. But what's really interesting here is that this word forces us to see righteousness as an active, living reality, not just some simple pardon or legal fiction.
And that brings us to a major theological crossroads. On one hand, you have imputed righteousness. Think of that as a legal acquittal or a straightforward declaration of forgiveness. On the other hand, there's imparted righteousness, which is about actual moral empowerment and real-world obedience. James's argument raises some serious questions about whether you can even separate those two concepts. He's absolutely adamant that God's declaration of righteousness has to come with real, measurable moral transformation.
So how exactly do faith and works interact? Well, James uses two really powerful Greek words to explain it. First is synergy, meaning faith works together with and actively assists our works. And second is teleo, meaning works perfect and complete our faith. Faith doesn't just sit there on the couch, it's the active engine behind the works, while the works bring that faith to its ultimate, intended perfection. You literally cannot separate them in a believer. Moving on to Section 4, Exhibit B, Rahab. Now, skeptics might look at this and say, well, Abraham was just a unique one-off outlier in history. So to prove this is actually a universal rule, James calls his next witness. And the contrast here is just wild. Rahab couldn't possibly be more different from the esteemed patriarchal father Abraham. She was a woman, a pagan, a prostitute, and she lived hundreds of years later. She represents the absolute furthest opposite end of the social, religious, and historical spectrum.
Yet, despite being Abraham's total opposite, James points out that Rahab was justified the exact same way. by showing that this marginalized woman was also justified by a faith that issued an action, literally risking her life to save the Israelite spies, James proves that this standard of active faith is a universal reality for absolutely everyone.
Section 5. The Body and Spirit. After laying out these pretty compelling case studies, James brings his whole argument to a climax with a shocking, deeply visceral metaphor.
He directly and deliberately ties the separation of faith and works to the grim theological concepts of death, disintegration, and total destruction. He writes, "For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so faith apart from works is dead." This is a brilliant illustration of the ancient Jewish mindset. In their culture, a human doesn't just have a body, they are a body. So claiming to have faith without acting on it is basically like lugging around a rotting corpse. It's grotesque, it's unclean, and it's completely useless. On the flip side, having works without faith is like an amorphous spirit, just an impossible vapor with no real existence. You absolutely have to have both for life to exist.
Which brings us to Section 6, Reconciling Paul and James. We've examined the historical evidence, we've looked at the linguistics, and we are finally ready to render a verdict on this great contradiction.
The whole mystery unravels when we realize Paul and James are actually targeting two completely different enemies. Paul is taking aim at self-righteous legalism, this idea that you can somehow earn your way to God just by following a checklist of rules. James, meanwhile, is attacking empty, lazy faith, the notion that just intellectually agreeing with the creed is enough, even if it lacks any actual moral obedience.
In fact, when Paul actually talks positively about works, like he does right here in Galatians 5:6, he says the only thing that matters is faith working through love. When Paul talks about genuine faith in action, he sounds exactly like James.
And that brings us to our verdict. Paul and James completely agree. Both of these biblical authors ultimately conclude that mere intellectual assent to a creed is useless. Genuine faith is a powerful engine that inevitably produces loving, obedient action. True faith is never truly alone. Which leaves us with this final crucial question. If true faith is a living, breathing body, what do your daily actions say about the vital signs of your own beliefs? I'm going to leave you to ponder that, because understanding the text is only the very first step. It's what you actually do with it that matters. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep digging into those complex ideas.